It must
So
be
are you
very late for you. Or
early?
Ah,
I am in Boston, so it is 6:30 a.m.
6:30.
Yeah. So
You call that
other,
early, Sadeep?
sorry?
You call that early?
6:30 a.m. So
Yeah, I know. Mine is 4:30.
4:30.
So by 6:30, I'm like halfway through my day.
Okay. No wonder you were able to do, what did you say? 25 hours.
25 hours ago.
You steal those hours from the morning session.
I know. I'm the
Wonderful.
only one who's an early bird in the family. My mother used to be, but now it's only me. So me, the neighbor's dog, are the only two people.
Good, good. But anyway, as you said, well begun is half done. So you are
Not that I
halfway.
do anything useful in the morning, just have some time to myself.
Very important.
Yeah.
Very, very important. So I think we are on time. So maybe we should start off.
Sure.
Is it okay?
I'm
Yeah.
ready. I'm ready.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening to those who are in India, Japan, and good morning those of you who have joined us from the other parts of the world like US and Europe. And welcome to this MIJSC and IIMB Oxygen Speak webinar presentation series. My name is Saidi Pratnam. I'm the COO of MIJSC. This center, Mizuho India Japan Study Center, is a center of excellence at IIM Bangalore. And the focus of this center has been to strengthen India and Japan bonds by promoting the academic, industry, and societal linkages. And this webinar series is one such attempt where we are bringing in experts from both the countries to talk about societal, technological, business, and other facets of life, highlighting both the Indian and the Japanese perspective. This webinar actually is 18th in our series of webinars and of Tatsujin Speak or Expert Speak. And 20th overall, if you consider also the panel discussion series, which is also a webinar, so to speak. This whole thing started at the peak of coronavirus. And though we would have loved to do it in a seminar format, physical format, but we found that the coverage here has increased dramatically. Therefore, we are sticking to this webinar format now. For this session, we have today with us Malavika R. Harita. And Professor Malavika Harita founded Brand Circle in 2018, which is a consultancy firm working in the areas of digital communication, storytelling, mentoring of startups, and also mentoring women entrepreneurs and corporate leaders in general. She is a resident mentor at our own NSRCL of IIMD and is actively involved in mentoring startups, the profit and non-profit sectors. She has also mentored startups at various other incubators, including Kerala Startup Mission, EHub, Gopal Krishna Deshpande Foundation at IIT Madras, IIM Visakhapatnam, I am Lucknow. So there are, she has been the startup motivator, mentor for the last many years. But in her earlier avatar, she founded and ran the Saatchi and Saatchi in India for 25 years, where she has worked on brands like Bosch, Reliance, Infosys, Microsoft, AstraZeneca, amongst others. And overall, she has more than 40 years of experience in communications and entrepreneurship, brand consultancy, strategic planning, training. And I can go on about her accomplishments, but then we will have less time for this session. So I will conclude by summing up her latest accomplishments over the current years. She has been the board of many, she's in the board of many organizations. She's in IIM's board of governors, and at IIM Visakhapatnam, IIM Bangalore I'm talking about, and also Visakhapatnam. And also her alma mater, Mount Carmel, and she is the advisory board of NSR cell at IIM Bangalore. And she teaches also marketing and communication at various PG institutes. And over 30 years, she believes in sharing, that sharing knowledge is the only way one can keep learning. We are indeed lucky to have such an accomplished speaker today for this session. I would like to welcome Malavika to this forum. But before I request her to share her thoughts, I will take just a minute to set the context for the discussion today. And also to remind you that she has agreed to take some questions from all of us at the end of this discussion. The theme, as I said, is creating a global lingua franca, internet's role in creating a common language and bridging the language divide. Language, as all of us know, is a major cultural component in building strong and harmonious communities, because culture and language are so closely intertwined that one wonders whether one can understand the culture of a society without really accessing its language. But in a global economy like we have today, we should be intentional in embracing the intercultural communication aspect. And we also know that this is easier said than done. Internet, of course, is helping bridge this gap in this communication. But the relationship between internet and language is a growing area both of policy interest as well as in academic studies, because it creates a lot of flutter. So the question remains, can it truly bridge the communication gap between societies? In today's digital world, can it really help us to build a new lingua franca for the world, which could maybe replace English? And languages, as we know, the question, again, I will reiterate, can internet take on the role of bridging the language divide? And in this talk, Professor Malavika Harita is planning to share her thoughts and how to create and communicate effectively. We can surely expect to gain a lot of insights into the role of language and technology in effective communication. So without much ado, may I request Professor Harita to share her thoughts on the theme for today's discussion. And that will be followed by some discussion between us. Over to you, Ala.
Thank you to the Mizuho India-Japan Study Center for inviting me to talk about something that I'm so passionate about, which is the power of communication. I'm thankful to Professor Saidi Pratnam, who was, by the way, my senior at IIM Bangalore, and we were we used to connect quite regularly when I was president of the Alumni Association. And then we kind of lost touch and suddenly met again, which was truly amazing. He's got two very enthusiastic members of his team, and I must thank them too, Shivam Srivastav and Saumya. I'm very grateful to two Japanese concepts which have actually shaped my thinking in life. And I'm not saying this because I'm speaking at the MIJSC. It's what I've actually followed through my career and through my life. When I was working for Toyota, it fascinated me. The Toyota way fascinated me. The way they articulated their entire strategy and plan, execution plan for every campaign on one side of an A3 size paper. And I thought that was so amazing. It taught me the power of brevity, focus, and clarity. And that is the KISS principle that I follow religiously in both my communication and my life. Ikigai is another Japanese concept, which actually helped me shape my second career after retirement from Saatchi by figuring out what gave me the most happiness and a future. So I'm grateful to both these for shaping my life and thinking. Being a baby boomer, which will basically tell you how old I am, I have had the unique opportunity of watching the evolution of communication media, starting with radio, the introduction of black and white television, color television, cable, DTH, pagers, mobile telephony, and in the recent years, the explosion of so many types of digital media. As a consumer behaviorist, while other media did change consumer habits, I am fascinated by the tremendous impact of digital media on consumer behavior. I believe that Jeff Bezos's real contribution to the world is not the company Amazon, but the Amazon effect, wherein the consumer began to expect every brick and mortar company to deliver what Amazon did, convenience at your doorstep. So it was digitize or die, which was further accelerated by COVID. All right, no more reminiscing. Let me talk about our subject for today, which is whether the internet could play a role in building a global lingua franca and bridging the language divide. There are many loaded phrases in this topic for today. You have the word global, we're talking about lingua franca, the internet, and the language divide. And I'm going to touch on these individually in this first introductory piece. When I was preparing for this webinar, I looked up the definition of lingua franca, and the Encyclopedia Britannica defines it as, I quote, language used as a means of communication between populations speaking vernaculars that are not mutually intelligible. As I see it, this is not just a global problem, but one we see even in diverse countries like ours. There has always been a language divide in our country. And in the old days of traditional media, sorry to talk about the past, when I was working in advertising, we had a standard set of 4 languages in which we would transcreate all our print, radio, and television advertising: English, Hindi, Tamil, and Bengali. And if we had money, we would add Malayalam and Marathi to the mix. Life was simple. But I find more and more as I teach and mentor that this is not enough. In fact, I believe we need 26x languages today if we are to really make an impact. My generation of immigrants from India, since they were fewer in number, tried to fit in to the country of their residents by learning the language. And as we used to say, become more American than the Americans. But as these numbers grew, emigres started forming their own microcosms within the host country. And learning the local language was no longer a priority. Yes, you needed a working knowledge of the language, but that was all. Thanks to politicians playing the ethnic card, and I'm talking about the globe today, large-scale mobility of people globally, new diasporas of immigrants forming in the most unlikely countries, and resentment of the local populace have made the language and cultural divides, according to me, even more pronounced than they used to be. The internet has given access to the world's information to everyone on this globe, theoretically, and has built connections between like-minded souls, irrespective of age, gender, and nationality. But I'm not truly sure, that it can bridge the communication gap and become the new lingua franca. In my opinion, I see the internet as a medium and a means to an end, rather than a language in itself. Let me talk a little about the importance of having a common language, or a lingua franca. As the definition states, it provides people with the ability to communicate effectively and connect with people from different cultures and backgrounds. A common language allows us to break down linguistic barriers and hopefully understand each other's perspectives and experiences. It also facilitates trade, business, and tourism between countries, allows people to work and travel freely in different parts of their world, expand their knowledge and understanding of other cultures, and form new friendships and relationships. Moreover, sharing a common language can actually strengthen a sense of community and foster unity amongst people if used correctly. It promotes understanding, builds trust, and encourages global cooperation. In a way, a common language can actually create common ground for the peoples of this world and reduce tension and conflict among diverse groups. It has immense potential to bring people together, break down barriers, and promote a more harmonious and cohesive global community. English has become the lingua franca, unofficial lingua franca over the centuries actually, and has been extremely useful. But my question is, can it continue to be so in today's digital world? And this is something I would like to examine as I go through this session. Some estimates say, there isn't anything very definitive here, but some estimates say that more than 1.2 billion people speak English in the world today as their native tongue, as a second language, or as a foreign language they have learned. And that's a lot of people. How did English become the lingua franca? Many reasons, including the historical and colonial legacies, the British Empire and American cultural and economic influence have spread English globally, making it a language of trade and diplomacy. English has become the language of international business, science, and technology, as well as the dominant language in the media and entertainment industries because of globalization. It is taught as a second language in many countries and is used often as a language of instruction in higher education, including our MBA programs across the country. Movies, TV, shows, and music have also contributed to the widespread popularity of English. It is considered easier to learn due to its simple grammar and pronunciation. The standardization of English through accepted grammar and spelling rules has made communication easier and more efficient. On a lighter note, some rules and pronunciations of certain words still fox me. This is in spite of having an English scholar as a mother who actually knew how to use a semicolon correctly. I believe Shashi Tharoor and my late mother are the only two people I know who can use the most complicated English words correctly and pronounce them right. During my research, I was looking at Chinese and Spanish, which are the next most widely spoken languages in the world. And I was wondering and considering whether they would become the world's lingua franca. While both are spoken widely in many countries, they have numerous dialects and regional variations, which make standardization very difficult. Complex grammar and pronunciation, imagine it's more complex in English, make them more difficult to learn for non-native speakers. The main point, though, is that while Spanish and Chinese are spoken widely, they're not as evenly distributed globally as English. The dominance of English-speaking countries in terms of political and economic power has also contributed to the widespread use of English as a lingua franca. So compared to any other language, I'm afraid English wins hands down. However, having said that, it is my belief, and I'm finding this more and more as I teach and mentor, that you need a language that you're comfortable with to create and communicate in. Now, this could be English or your native tongue. It does not matter, but you need both a broader, so what I'm saying is you need a language to think in, and you need a broader lingua franca and technology to disseminate it to a wider audience, else it will remain undiscovered. And this is where I believe digital technology plays a very, very strong role. Technology can be used not just to disseminate ideas, but to help build communication where using the various tools and information services available, ChatGPT being one of them. But in my personal view, I see it more as an enabler than a creator. So in today's VUCA world, I believe we need a combination of a language we're comfortable and can think in, the power of technology to help us in the process of creation and dissemination, using a common lingua franca, which at this point, I think is English.
Thank you.
Naideep, why are you laughing?
No. I think you have captured the essence of today's discussion in a very succinct manner, as you rightly said. I would like to take our discussion into a couple of phases. First, before we come on to the technology aspect, I would like to explore with you the language evolution itself, or language as a unifier, as a divider in society. So language, as you know, has always fascinated scholars, including yourself. And it is something that is unseen, and we use it to shape the world. And it has the power both to create and overthrow regimes. And this is historical truth. But because words can build or even break relationships, and people bonds are also similarly built or broken. So when used negatively, it can be used to keep people down, like gender biases, race, caste. So these are the put downs which we are very familiar with. And the common factor there is a common language. And similarly, common language is also used to dehumanize people, where I mean, there is an old saying that violence starts with dehumanization and dehumanization starts with language. So, but in your view, so taking away the negative aspects which we are familiar with, you did touch upon this, but can you throw more light on what is your view about the positive aspects of having a common language to unite people and create, so to speak, bridges between people?
I found a very interesting quote, Saideep, by a guy called Frank Smith. And to quote it here, it says, language is not a genetic gift, it's a social gift. And learning a new language is becoming a member of the club, the community of speakers of that language. So language technically, and you're right when you say this, should unite people by building the sense of shared identity and help to bring people together. I believe it can serve as a bridge between different cultures, allowing people to understand and appreciate different traditions and customs. But people have to make an effort to learn and understand different languages. And if they do that, it can actually promote empathy and inclusion and encourage a lot of cross-cultural understanding. Different languages can be seen as a source of diversity, and efforts to preserve and promote linguistic diversity can actually help to preserve those cultures, right? Instead of having one juggernaut culture, which is sweeping the world, promoting diverse languages, which actually help to retain some of our ethnic cultures. I want to add a rider here. Language can bring inclusivity, provided the culture from which it is born is also accepted and understood. I think just knowing a language or speaking a language doesn't necessarily unite anybody or any country. So I think language, I think, is an offshoot or a result of the culture from which it is born. And unless you understand that culture, the language just becomes, it could be anything, right? It's just a mode of communication.
I think that's an important insight. What you're saying is the nuances which come out through the cultural usage of the language needs also to be understood and appreciated for it to become a cohesive force.
And truly use that language,
Right.
Use the potential of that language to communicate.
Right. Okay.
But
what I would, sorry, you were saying something?
no, but what saddens me, Saideep, is that everything human has two sides, right? And for example, the internet itself, it's done so much good, but who expected pornography and the dark web to become so powerful? And that is something I'd like to touch upon a little later in the session. Please go ahead.
Okay. Right. So, so I will revert to my earlier question. In another, we will explore another aspect of it, because it is famously said that a common language certainly makes an alliance easier, though one must not forget that it makes quarreling also easier. So, so would you agree with the hypothesis that common language can also be a seed of conflict? And does it conflict with the idea that common language is desirable for societal building bonds or societal cohesion, so to speak? Because you did touch upon language as a social gift. I think it's a powerful concept. And also touched upon the cultural nuances to be understood. But what is, in your view, the power of common language? Is it a seed of conflict, or can it be used for building societal cohesion?
As I mentioned, anything created by human beings has a good side and a bad side. Just depends upon how you use it. Used well, obviously, theoretically, it can facilitate communication, understanding between individuals, communities, a sense of identity and belonging, and sort of social cohesion.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I don't know whether, I've been noticing a lot of this. A common language can also be a tool of, shall I say, exclusion and discrimination against those who do not speak it, right? And I'm finding more and more, and I don't know whether that is political or because of the large-scale migration that is happening, but communication barriers and very rigid attitudes, perhaps. But I think communication barriers, cultural differences, and some form of linguistic elitism, as I call it, where certain languages are seen as more prestigious than others, are some of the problems today which are leading to misunderstandings, misinterpretations, and conflicts, especially when it comes to cultural values and beliefs. And that, I believe, is the crux of the problem. Speaking the language does not necessarily guarantee that you understand or subscribe or believe in the culture from which it originates. But by and large, I believe that the good outweighs the bad. There's always a good and bad to every side, but I believe the good outweighs the bad. And I think a common language is essential, this very, very diverse world that we live in. At the same time, I think we need to respect linguistic diversity and work towards bringing bridging this linguistic divide, so to speak, to prevent conflict and exclusion. Because I notice that there is a lot of exclusion and a lot of complexes that people are developing because they don't speak a particular language, or they kind of retreat into their shells and, sort of reject the language, both of which are not good for social inclusion.
In fact, in your introduction, you did touch upon another aspect which I would like to explore. Because during my own extensive travels and stays in many countries, in England, USA, Europe, and also Japan, I have seen that integration of migrants, you did talk about it in your beginning, integration becomes easier if they learn the host country's language. And as it helps to develop a sense of, so to speak, belonging and reconstruct ways of life and identities. And even within India, which is such a diverse, it's a microcosm of the world, so to speak. So we have similar challenges. We have migration across states, and from Hindi speaking to South Indian or East Indian, or West Indian. Migrations are becoming common now within India itself, forget the world. But some scholars seem to argue that one must go beyond the borders of language and look at social equality and participation in society as the more important approach. So it is not just the language integration, but the societal integration is what some people stress. But what are your thoughts on the importance of language integration? Because you did mention that, early immigrants did become more British or more American than Americans. So in that context, what is the language integration vis-a-vis social integration in building social cohesion in modern societies. Because if, as you said, more and more as the numbers increase, you have a set of people who talk only Hindi, but they are staying in, say, South Indian societies. So the integration is not happening if the language is not common language is not being used. So the last part of my question is it obvious that is it not obvious that language does have a dual role in integrating people, but also in a way stratifies people into social parameters? You did talk about exclusion, but common language, can it create a social exclusion or social parameters? I'm slightly deviating from the language itself, but looking at the societal impact of all this.
Okay. I'm going to quote again. I'm full of quotations today. I'm very impressed with myself. But this is from Nelson Mandela. Says that if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. But if you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart. And I thought this sort of kind of answers the question that you were asking me about language integration and social integration. And I believe both are equally important. With globalization and this whole scale migration that is happening caused by employment opportunities or even by war, it is important to create policies which are multilingual, which promote multilingualism and ensure equal access to social welfare programs and opportunities to all individuals in that country, irrespective of their linguistic abilities. And language does play a vital role by fostering this social cohesion, right? Allowing individuals to communicate with each other and understand each other's cultural backgrounds. I strongly believe that learning the host country's language is essential for migrants to gain a sense of belonging and feel integrated into society. But it can also act as a barrier, according to me, because it may stratify people based on their linguistic abilities. Obviously, an immigrant would not have the same facility with the language that a local would have. And I think it's up to the government to promote multilingualism and create policies that ensure that people can be seamlessly accepted and participate in society without feeling discriminated against. I think I've taken a very simplistic view. If migrants are not made to feel that they're essential to their host country, they will never reach their full potential. Now, I'm going to talk at a little tangent, because I believe that the immigrants have also to play their role. Social inclusion cannot be a one-way street, right? So I think a lot of immigrants have to also play their role in accepting that they are part of another country and accepting both the language and the culture while keeping their own culture intact. Technology would play a role in this by increasing language use on search engines, collaborating with linguists and experts on various languages, so that they can improve their services for diverse language communities. Now, while we can legislate this and ensure that we have a multilinguistic society, I don't think it's worked anywhere in the world when a language has been imposed on a country. And I think more importantly, the spirit of inclusivity is what we really want to achieve to make linguistic marginalized communities feel included. But again, I repeat, I think it's a two-way handshake. It can't just happen from the host country. The immigrants also need to want to immigrate, want to include and be included.
you. Um, can we explore one important aspect? You did just now talk about the power of, how do you call it, technology. So the link between culture and language also is a very powerful linkage, which you did touch upon. And they say that learning a language, and you also mentioned this, that without learning the culture or cultural, so to speak, nuances, does not help communicate effectively, especially societies which have been very exclusive or built over, like say Japan, which has been cut off from the world for many centuries. And therefore, their cultural evolution and their language evolution has happened together, over the centuries. Now, when a foreigner like me wants to learn a language like Japanese, I'm just using Japanese as a extreme example, but I think it is true for South Indians learning Hindi or vice versa. So the effect could quite be opposite of what is intended, meaning we can really use the word, but not use the tone or the finer elements. And therefore, we are probably ending up communicating a very wrong or misleading image of what we want to say. So, what are some ways we can address these challenges? That means, how does one manage not just use a translator to communicate, because now technology has become so powerful that I speak into a device and the device communicates with the other person, and the same reverse, it can happen. But in this era of ubiquitous use of internet-based technologies, especially more recently the AI, and you mentioned about the chat GPT, which is still in its infancy, and therefore may not translate the nuances, or will not look at my tone and translate it what I mean, rather than just the translation itself of the words. So what do you think could be the ways one can address these challenges?
Saideep, even when we speak in the same language, there are misunderstandings, right? So just imagine how much it is accelerated when we speak in different languages. You very rightly said that unless we understand the culture, we cannot speak the language correctly. We may speak it technically right, but the nuances are what adds to the flavor of the language. So in my career in business, I've realized that those cultural nuances are so important when you're having discussions, particularly in today's sort of globalized world. And it is very necessary for us to understand cultural context when we are communicating in a language which is not what we are used to. Now, I have a different theory on this. As you said, there's so much technology available, translators, whatever. So that's not the difficult part. I think the more difficult part is you can have sensitivity training and cross-cultural workshops. I know I've been through many of them and run many of them. But I believe that no amount of training or learning will help you unless you have an open mind. And I think a large part of the problems and misunderstandings happen not because of the language. We blame it on the language, but I think it is more about the open-mindedness of people, right? And unless you have an open mind about the people who are not like you, let alone who speak a different language, I don't think these barriers are going to go away. And I think that is the problem. I always come to the root of the problem. I think that is the problem. And we're getting very insensitive while we go through all these training programs, especially in corporate life. I think we're very insensitive about the other person's culture, and they don't bother to explain it to us. So, it sort of becomes barriers of silence. I think that is the problem.
Actually, this center, MIJSC, is launching something called, Japanese language course. So we were basically on aspect which is very different from the usual the Japanese language courses that are on offer, which is that you have reading and writing skills. And they are also tested on that. But when people go there to Japan, after having got a high level of, expertise as per on paper, when they go to Japan, they are unable to communicate because they know how to read and write, and but they are unable to talk. So we are trying to design a course where communication effectiveness is more stressed on rather than just reading.
Language skills, yeah.
So that is why these insights from this discussion could be used by us to make a better program, which will be more effective. So, hopefully, we can use your expertise in building such a program for our students as well as all people from India, especially the students who want to, engineering students, MBA students who want to go to Japan. Which is,
and there are huge opportunities in Japan, which we don't exploit because of the language divide. You're right. Right.
Yeah.
I was doing some digging into, technology and language. And I got some stats, which I thought I'd share with you. I believe out of the 6,000 languages in use today worldwide, search engines like Google only allow you to use about 130 of them, right? Now, it's good that governments beat up Google and say, hey, you must cover all the 6,000. But at the end of the day, they are a commercial enterprise, right? And they don't touch languages which don't have much traction. And I think it is up to governments and all of us and foundations like yours, which actually should help and maybe fund or finance these large platforms to be more inclusive, to collaborate with experts, like you said, building this course, collaborate with experts on various languages to ensure that there is diversity. Because what could happen is whether the internet, the smaller languages, the languages which are not so popular, don't have so much traction, will slowly die. And I think it's already happening. And I think that's a very dangerous thing because people, if they can't find what they want in their language, they will obviously migrate to something else. And I think that's going to prove a death knell to a lot of smaller languages, which still need to be retained to give us this, wholesomeness in the world.
Powerful. Thank you. I think that's another important insight from this talk, because for other reasons, I have been interacting with the Netherlands. And what I found very interesting in Netherlands was that the government there said, we are not able to, for higher studies, higher classes, especially the college, they have made English as the language across all the Dutch part, because they said that the research which is happening, papers that are getting published, are by and large in English. And translating it effectively into Dutch is so resource intensive that they are not able to do it. So, I mean, unless technology can become a leveler, I think what I found very interesting is that they said it's not worth it. A small country like Netherlands cannot do that type of investments. Therefore, they just switched. And of course, locals protested, but today that is what is the status in Netherlands. So, yeah. So thank you. I would like to go back to another aspect that you mentioned in your first part of your context setting about the social media. So we are all aware that social media has become so prominent for marketing and significantly important for businesses and companies to have sort of multilingual websites and digital marketing campaigns to flourish and to expand in a global market. So you are a marketing communication specialist. So how do you see companies ensuring that their online content is accessible and engaging to the customers who speak in a very different language? Are there any best practices for creating effective multilingual digital content? Why I'm asking this question is because it is linked with the premise which we have been discussing so far. The premise is that different languages have different nuances, and verbatim translation will not work here. So in that context, can you give us your thoughts on this?
Okay. No, I built many global campaigns in my career. And one of the things which actually worked was a process of transliteration. So while you need an overall global umbrella under which brands have to survive, you definitely need some localization, so to speak. The other thing that I found, and I've run campaigns across, is that you need local people. You need local teams. You actually need your local teams to participate in this whole process of communication. So I have released campaigns which were just superimposed by New York, and we had to release it all over the world. It had no meaning, and it sort of was just a waste of millions of dollars. And I've had campaigns where we've had flexible guidelines. The essence of the campaign was what was given to us. And then we developed campaigns within the country. And I think that was what worked because it was based on local research. It was based on local personas. And it was also based on knowledge of the local team, which normally is discounted because, you know, head office knows everything. So in my experience, what happens normally is that the global campaign, the global assets, the digital assets are all current, up to date, you know, all attention is paid to them. And local assets, for example, if you have a website in a smaller country, you kind of, it's outdated, it's not relevant, it's full of mistakes, it's changing now, I'm glad, but still, it gives a very bad impression about the attention that the brand pays to a local market. And I think that's something that should change. And I found that brands which take the trouble to localize, keeping their global thing in mind, localization is the word, and transliterate rather than translate, have done well. And some of the examples I was thinking of was IKEA, probably Airbnb, Google, right? And I remember we worked a campaign for HP as well when I was there. So I strongly believe that the same attention to detail that you pay to your main website should be accorded to all your country communication, your country campaigns. And the only way you can do that is to do it locally and not impose it from wherever the head office is. The other interesting thought, and this is something we did, was to build case studies and thought leadership programs in local countries. And that got us a lot of traction. I remember when I was handling the HP enterprise business and Bosch, the Bosch campaigns, building thought leadership locally and using local celebs and local companies was actually much more effective than bringing in someone who was well known maybe in the US or in Europe. Coca-Cola is another great company. And because they have shifted to what is called user-generated content, they have become extremely regionalized and topical and engaging to local audiences.
I had one question, but I think you have answered it. But anyway, I will put it in a slightly different way. You have covered a lot of ground over this last 45 minutes. So what would be your sort of words of wisdom for the young, and not so young also, managers who are in the audience today, about managing their communication content and styles across different cultural settings? You did talk about involvement of the locals, but are there any more do's and don'ts that could be the takeaway for these youngsters and not so youngsters?
Okay. I have talked about this, that language originates from the culture. So cultural sensitivity, understanding cultures and being open to it is one of the things that I strongly recommend. The more languages you know, the wider your horizons grow. And I think that's a very interesting idea. Even in India, the more Indian languages you know, the more cultural nuances you are able to absorb. In the corporate world, fortunately or unfortunately, knowledge of English is important. Breaks down many barriers of communication and culture, especially if you're working across global teams. For academics also, I believe that looking at multilingual presentations, doing localized research, just like brands do, works brilliantly, because that is what spreads ideas worth having. I'm going to give you a hybrid solution, Saideep, right? We're all about hybrid working and hybrid solutions today. I don't think, and I'm going to be accused of being a colonialist, I believe replacing English as a lingua franca is not practical. So what I believe is that we should actually expand the footprint of English as a lingua franca, right? Not by conquest and colonization as was done earlier, but by providing access to the language for communities and people around the world. I'm also very interested in something that is developing, which is not communicative English, which is what we were all taught, but transactional English, which kind of standardizes the whole language and makes it much easier for people to absorb. I believe that technology is going to play a huge role, including social media, online language learning, and there's so many things available to expand the reach of English. But this engine, right, and this is my caveat here, should be powered by ideas, which could be conceived in English if you're comfortable with it, or in a language that you are comfortable with. So I think ideas should be language agnostic. And most people think much better in what we call in India their mother tongue. And then you use digital technology to create. There's so many tools now available to create, transmit, but also transliterate it into a common lingua franca, which I believe should be English, so that it travels across boundaries. And like TEDx says, ideas that cause conversations, right? And I believe that is what will make it universally appealing, which will make ideas spark newer ideas. And in my opinion, what is most critical is spark change. Thank you.
There are many questions from the audience, I will take on one. It says some mind-boggling data points from India. 107 languages are spoken in Bangalore, Karnataka. Dimapur in Nagaland has 103 languages. I don't know whether they're languages or some dialects maybe.
Yeah, dialects.
So Sonitpur in Assam with 101 languages. I mean, how can one even envisage a principle on how to keep such diversity alive and thriving? Any practical insights on this, please?
Okay. Yeah, it does sound very mind-boggling, and that's just in 3 or 4 states. Yeah. My take on this is, I have noticed this talk. I have a lot of students and people from the Northeast. I've noticed that they have a lot of different communities which are not able to converse with each other. But practically, there is some kind of a lingua franca that has developed within a state, right? Which is what they use for inter-community communication, just like English is the global lingua franca. It is difficult, and I am quite certain, and let's be practical about it, I'm quite certain that as communities shrink, some of these languages are going to die. But if we can create community-wise lingua franca, mini lingua franca, so to speak, I think there'll be some hope of keeping languages alive, keeping local languages alive, you know. Like Konkani is a mixture of Marathi and Kannada and Tamil, right? And Malayalam. So I'm thinking maybe something like that. It sounds a bit like a mishmash, but I think that's the only way that the smaller languages will be able to survive.
Good. Thank you. I think we have run out of time currently, and thank you for coming and sharing your wonderful thoughts. It has been a very enlightening session for all of us. And one point I wanted to also inform you, Mala, is that what we do at this center is publish these insights into a sort of a booklet or a book. Yes. And we also put it on our website so that people can, you are also being live streamed on the YouTube. So there is a lot of information available. And we also produce these books of knowledge so that we can integrate them under the...
Okay. That's very interesting, Sai. I'd be most happy to collaborate and share whatever little I know.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All the best. God bless. Thank you.